The character that today's lore video is about is a character that I imagine non-book readers won't actually know all that much about, and this is despite the fact that she appears in The Witcher 3. This is simply because she appears quite close to the end of the game, and I'd argue is a minor character at best in The Witcher 3. This character is the Nilfgaardian sorceress Fringilla Vigo, and I've decided to make today's entry about her. Not much is known about this character's origins, but you could argue that canonically, at least if you go by key events mentioned in the Witcher universe, she first appears at the Battle of Sodden Hill. For those of you that may not know of this battle, the Battle of Sodden Hill is one of the most important battles in the history of the Northern Kingdoms. I won't get fully into it, as I do plan to cover this battle in full in the future, but for now just understand that it was a decisive battle between the Northern Realms and Nilfgaard that led to the Northern Realms' victory over Nilfgaard in the First Nilfgaard-Nordling War. In this battle, mages were used on both sides to their full destructive potential. Many notable mages from both the games and the books were present at this battle. For example, on the northern side, there were sorceresses such as Yennefer and Triss, and on the Nilfgaardian side, there were sorceresses such as Aesir Eilhart and Fringilla Vigo. It is actually mentioned by Yennefer of Vengerberg during her first proper introduction to Fringilla that they had in fact met before, as Yennefer had seen her on Sodden Hill. However, I'll get into that first meeting later in the video. Fringilla is first properly introduced in the Witcher book Baptism of Fire. When we first meet her, she is discussing many interesting topics with her fellow Nilfgaardian sorceress Aesir Eilhart, who you may remember if you played The Witcher 2. One of these topics is surrounding Emir Emreis and his search for Ciri, which isn't exactly important for her character, but just know that the Emperor asked her to examine a lock of Ciri's hair and locate her, as was Aesir and many other Nilfgaardian mages. Fringilla failed to locate her. They also discussed the whole fake Ciri conspiracy along with Cahir's involvement, but explaining that would take too much time, so I'll save that for a later video, perhaps a video on Cahir in general, as it basically just covers his entire story, or maybe even just a video on fake Ciri or something like that. The most important and closing topic of this conversation is when Aesir extends an invitation to Fringilla regarding a recently formed organization, this organization being the Lodge of Sorceresses. In fact, Aesir didn't even manage to propose the question to Fringilla, as Fringilla interrupted her mid-sentence, simply responding, "I'm ready." Basically, Aesir was just saying about how, wouldn't it be great if there was an organization with blah blah blah, and then she just interrupted and just said, "I'm ready." Now, I imagine you will all have heard of the Lodge of Sorceresses, as they are present throughout the Witcher books from Baptism of Fire, and I believe they are present in one way or another in every single Witcher game. For example, I believe Triss is talking to another member of the Lodge at some point in The Witcher 1, obviously they're very major in The Witcher 2, and you can actually properly meet them in The Witcher 3. To give a very simple, brief summary, the Lodge of Sorceresses is an organization that was founded by Phillipa Eilhart after the destruction of the Brotherhood of Sorcerers, and it is an organization that looks out for the interests of magic, believing it to be the greatest good that should not be divided by borders. Also, its members are exclusively women. Now, this organization is far more complicated than that. For example, they had this whole plan to marry Ciri off to Tancred, the future king of Kovir. There is also, of course, a lot of what I would argue is self-interest involved in this organization, but what I said before would be its basic mission statement. After her talk with Aesir, Fringilla is next seen at a meeting of the Lodge of Sorceresses. In fact, it is Fringilla's first meeting with the Lodge, although there had been previous meetings, just with less members. In this part of the book, we learn that Fringilla had some kind of strange initial prejudices against the sorceresses of the Northern Kingdoms. She imagined that the Lodge's meeting might turn into some sort of strange swingers party, but this runaway thought was instantly quenched once she saw the Northern sorceresses, who she noted to be beautiful. Only Sabrina Glevizig and Kira Metz wore lower necklines, and they were only slightly lower than hers. She made light conversation with the Northern Sorceresses and even took a liking to Triss Merigold, and she also noted that the beauty of the Elven sorceress Francesca Findabair was not exaggerated at all, and all in all, her first meeting with the Lodge was going quite well. That was until her interaction with the sorceress Yennefer of Vengerberg, who within her first interaction with Fringilla brought up the Battle of Sodden Hill, where they fought on opposite sides. It is noted when Yennefer brought this up, the entire room went silent with anticipation. There is a lot more to say about this meeting as a whole, but nothing particularly important to this character, so I'm just going to list off some minor facts that we learn from her in a monologue during this meeting. We first learn that she doesn't understand why the other mages aren't welcoming of the Nilfgaardian invasion, as she believes Nilfgaard will bring culture and political stability, and she just can't see how these very intelligent women can't see that. However, she does then add that she doesn't know how she'd react if someone invaded her home. This meeting is also the first time Fringilla learns of the Witcher Geralt of Rivia, which is quite important for later in the story. Fringilla also learns of Folka's rebellion, indicating that important northern events aren't exactly known throughout Nilfgaard. Fringilla also assists Yennefer in her escape, as Yennefer was effectively the Lodge's prisoner at this time, despite technically being Francesca's guest there, as Francesca was allowed to bring up to 2 sorceresses to be made into members, and for one she chose Yennefer, but she was still basically a prisoner. After this meeting, Fringilla next appears briefly in the Witcher book, The Tower of the Swallow. It is mentioned that she is in Beauclair, and that she sent a letter to Asire. In a vision, it is also said that Geralt's eyes can be seen in the reflection of hers. This brings us to the Witcher book, The Lady of the Lake, which is when Fringilla first meets Geralt and when she becomes a slightly more of a central character, effectively meaning she has slightly more of an impact on the main story. In the books, obviously excluding The Last Wish and The Sword of Destiny, the general main story is that Geralt is looking for Ciri, and whilst pursuing her, his journey brings him to many interesting places and he meets many interesting people. And one of the interesting places he goes to, fairly close towards the end of the books, is Toussaint. At the time when Geralt went to Toussaint, he was travelling with a company that consisted of the Nilfgaardian Cahir, Milver, Angoulême, Dandelion, and of course the Higher Vampire Regis. Due to circumstances that are too complicated to get into, he ends up in Toussaint, and whilst in Toussaint, as his friend Dandelion used to be a, let's just say, lover to the Duchess Anna Henrietta, they are welcomed with open arms. The whole story of Dandelion and Anna Henrietta is actually quite a fun one, so I will definitely cover it in future, so stay tuned for that if you're interested. When meeting Anna Henrietta, the Duchess informs Geralt, along with a host of people present at this court meeting, that Dandelion and himself will serve her at the coming festival. The way in which Geralt is asked to serve is to ferment grapes with the cousin of Anna Henrietta, who just so happens to be Fringilla Vigo. So he attends the festival and ferments grapes with Fringilla, alongside Anna Henrietta, who also ferments grapes with Dandelion. During this festival, it is important to note that Fringilla was quite flirty with Geralt. Next, there was a feast in which Geralt was seated next to the sorceress as he carried her to the vat and fermented grapes with her. By Toussaint tradition, he effectively became her knight. They talked, ate, had a brief spat, but by the end of the feast, she was holding his hand under the table, and he was telling her he trusted her. It is important to note that Geralt only planned to stay in Toussaint a few days, despite the fact that winter was on its way, as he wished to reach Ciri as soon as possible. He even got angry at Dandelion, who wished to stay in Toussaint, as Dandelion claimed to love Anna Henrietta and wanted to stay with her. But after this argument, Geralt went to the library of the palace where he found Fringilla. After a brief conversation, he slept with her right there on the library floor. But as they were making such a mess, they went and found her bed. Geralt then remained in Toussaint for 2 months, making love to Fringilla, talking to her, and taking on the occasional contract. That whole part of the book is also very interesting, and Geralt actually makes a significant amount of money doing all the contracts. Now, returning to Fringilla, we later find out that she knew of a secret room in the castle of Beauclair that was only known to a few, most notably her uncle Artorius Vigo, who was a well-respected specialist in all kinds of illusions. The secret room was elven, as the castle of Beauclair was originally built by the elves. Upon entering this room, Fringilla talked to the sorceress Phillipa Eilhart, along with the rest of the Lodge of Sorceresses, using a telecommunicator. We then find out that Fringilla had been tasked by Phillipa to delay the Witcher in Toussaint for as long as possible, preferably until May. Fringilla stated that she wouldn't be able to keep him there for that amount of time, but she would try to keep him there for as long as possible. She purposely didn't mention to the other members of the lodge that during sex, Geralt had called out Yennefer's name twice, hence why she wasn't exactly confident she could keep him there for that long. We next see Fringilla at another meeting of the Lodge of Sorceresses, where she is explaining to the other members how Geralt remained with her until the new year. She explains all that he did and later states that he was completely in her power. Triss was of course present for these meetings, and it was stated that her blue eyes flashed with hatred upon hearing this, most likely out of jealousy. Fringilla was of course lying, as Geralt seemed to be far more interested in pursuing contracts than doing all that Fringilla asked of him. In the very next scene, which is technically a flashback I suppose, we see Fringilla asking Geralt to return to bed and him outright refusing, as he wanted to go and do a contract. She then discusses with the Lodge of Sorceresses how the main issue was his companions, as she said they had an influence on the Witcher that she could not overcome. I won't get into every conversation she had with each of his companions, as at that point I'll basically just be reading the book, but just know we get to see a lot of Regis along with his clear intelligence, and to be honest, any bits with Regis in are some of my favourite parts of the books. We then learn that after Geralt's old Witcher medallion melted, as it melted prior to going to Toussaint, I won't get into all of that now, but just know it melted, he was given a new one by Fringilla, and although Geralt initially preferred his old one, it later grew on him, as he was able to use it to help him discover a secret room deep in one of the many caverns of Toussaint. In this secret room, he was able to spy on Stefan Skellen along with other important Nilfgaardians, who were planning the assassination of the Emperor of Nilfgaard, Emir var Emreis. Towards the end of their conversation, they revealed the location of Vilgefortz, who at that point in the books had Yennefer as his prisoner, which Geralt also found out. It is at this point Geralt returns to Toussaint and opts to leave immediately, and although Fringilla tries to stop him, he refuses. They sleep together one more time, and Geralt reveals to Fringilla the location of Vilgefortz. However, it turns out Geralt actually lied to Fringilla and told her the wrong location. Fringilla, without realizing, had told the Lodge this incorrect information, and embarrassingly, the Lodge sent out a SWAT mission to destroy the castle before Geralt could even arrive. However, once they arrived there, they found it was just cobwebs and broken furniture. Basically, Geralt knew what she was trying to do. For the rest of the books, Fringilla is basically just embarrassed about this and doesn't really do much except weigh in on an issue surrounding Ciri. She states that she believes the Lodge should allow Geralt to meet with his daughter Ciri, and I'm not going to get into all that, but just know that by the end she was actually quite nice and she wanted Geralt to be able to see Ciri, despite the fact that it wasn't exactly in the Lodge's best interests. Nothing is really known about Fringilla past this point, right up until the events of The Witcher 3. All we know is that at some point Fringilla was arrested by the Emperor of Nilfgaard, Emir var Emreis, and this was most likely during the events of The Witcher 2, as during the events of The Witcher 2, Arsida var Anahid was killed when her connection to the Lodge was discovered. Fringilla was imprisoned and then released later thanks to a bargain the sorceress Yennefer of Vengerberg made with the Emperor of Nilfgaard, Emir var Emreis. Geralt is able to have a brief conversation with Fringilla in The Witcher 3, where she basically confirms that she's still kind of annoyed with him, as he didn't really check up on her or see how she was doing the entire time he regained his memory. Fringilla then assists with helping to stop the Wild Hunt at the very end of The Witcher 3, then we don't really find out anything else about her. I imagine that she is set free at least at the end of The Witcher 3, and most likely didn't return to Nilfgaard based on the fact she cannot be found in Toussaint, which is a place I imagine she would at least appear if she went back to the Nilfgaardian Empire. And to be fair, perhaps it's not really in her best interests to return to Nilfgaard based on the fact that Emir, although won't imprison her anymore, definitely doesn't trust her. I like to imagine that maybe she's staying with Phillipa, or maybe even moved to Kovir, like the mages Triss rescued from Novigrad. Kovir is arguably the safest place in all of the Northern Kingdoms for mages, and probably even safer than Nilfgaard. I'd even argue, regardless of what ending you get, as I imagine that even if Dijkstra becomes king or you get one of the many endings, there'll still be a lot of prejudice towards mages just because of certain religions like the Church of the Eternal Fire, or other religions that are present in Nilfgaard, or just the general populace opinion of mages, whereas Kovir is very accepting of them. Anyway guys, that's the end of today's entry, and I hope you all learnt something new. There is also a little bit of trivia and something you probably already know, but there's actually an additional dialogue option with Fringilla in The Witcher 3, but you can only access it with a console command, and for some unknown reason it just doesn't work automatically, and it's to do with Cantarella. It's not really important at all, and doesn't really have anything to do with her character. I'm sure if you wanted to, you could find something to do with that and have a look at it if you wanted to. Today's video took me a very long time to make, not just because of all the clips, but gathering all of this information as well, so I'd really appreciate you liking it if you enjoyed it and want to see more of this sort of content. As always, be sure to subscribe if you're new, as I make Witcher videos every week, and if you subscribe you won't miss them. Be sure to follow me on Twitch, as I plan to move on to Red Dead Redemption 2 soon, and follow my Twitter. Also, join the Discord and Reddit, and maybe even check out my Instagram. All the links for everything are in the description, and finally, a big thank you to the Patreon pledges. You guys are honestly amazing, and I really appreciate all of your support. Honestly, thank you all so much, and I'm glad to put you at the end of these videos. Anyway guys, I hope you all enjoyed today's video, have an awesome rest of the week, and I'll see you all in the next one. See you later guys.